Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Kimberly Peeler-Allen, board chair of the Equal Rights Amendment Coalition. And it is so great to be with you here today for our second town hall of 2022 as we talk about the importance of voting rights. These town halls are brought to you with the support of the Harnish Foundation as part of a series of town halls throughout the year. I hope you will continue to join these important conversations. The topic of voting rights is an important one for us here at the ERA Coalition and the Fund for Women's Equality. While the Equal Rights Amendment is really a key to so many of the issues that affect women, men, and non-binary individuals, voting rights is actually the foundation of it all. We think an expanded electorate with its easy access to the ballot is critical for democracy and brings us the best government when all voters are able to have their voices heard at the ballot box, not just a chosen few. We have some great guests joining us for this conversation, and we're so lucky to have them as supporters and members of the ERA Coalition. We are all in this fight together. So we're going to just get started right away with this amazing panel. We are joined this afternoon with Representative Teresa, who represents Alabama's 7th Congressional District, which encompasses Montgomery, Birmingham, Selma, and Tuscaloosa. First elected to Congress in 2010, Congresswoman Sewell is the first Black woman to ever serve in the Alabama congressional delegation. It is such a shame that we are still having to celebrate all of these firsts, but until we have all, we will have first. So congratulations, Congresswoman. So of course, representing Alabama's Civil Rights District with her hometown of Selma, Alabama, she is the sponsor of H.R. 4, the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. We are also joined this afternoon by Dr. Maya Rockeymoore Cummings, who is a non-resident senior fellow at the Brookings Metro and the founder, president, and CEO of Global Policy Solutions. Her forthcoming book, Rageism, Racism, Ageism, and the Quest for Liberation Policy will be published this year. Congratulations on that. Okay. Dr. Rockeymoore Cummings has worked as Vice President of Programs and Research at the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, Chief of Staff for former Congressman Charles Rangel, Senior Resident Scholar for Health and Income Security at the National Urban League, and on the Social Security Subcommittee of the House Ways and Means Committee. We will be joined, I'm just checking to see if they have dropped in. We will also be joined by Maria Teresa Kumar, the founding president of Voto Latino, and Melanie Campbell of the Black Women's Roundtable. So just to get this conversation started, Congresswoman, what should we be thinking about in this critical moment about voting rights and the importance of it at this time?
Well, thank you, Kimberly. I want to thank you for the introduction and thank you for inviting me to be a part of today's panel. The ERA Coalition is near and dear to my heart. We're not giving up. This is such an important fact that women's rights and African-American rights kind of intersect when it comes to voting rights. And for me, voting rights comes very personal. As you said, I get the opportunity each and every day to represent Alabama's 7th Congressional District. It includes the historic cities of Birmingham, Montgomery, Tuscaloosa, and my hometown of Selma, Alabama. You know, it was in my hometown almost 57 years ago where foot soldiers like John Lewis shed blood on the Edmund Pettus Bridge for the equal right of all Americans to vote. It was there in Selma where ordinary Americans demanded of this nation that they live up to its ideals of equality and justice for all. And it was in Selma that the Selma to Montgomery March began, and it was a starting point of that march. And it's also in Selma that because of that march, we got the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And so for me, I didn't have to read about the civil rights movement or the voting rights movement in our history books. The people who were courageous enough to join in with SCLC and SNCC and others were citizens of Selma, and they were my neighbors, my church members, my Brownie troop leader. They were these amazing people who did extraordinary, who really helped to bring about extraordinary social change. But and so we lived under the Voting Rights Act of 1965 up until 2013 and the Shelby versus Holder decision, when the Supreme Court gutted Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act, which was a coverage formula, thereby making or nullifying Section 5, which was the enforceability. So preclearance. And so since 2013, we have not had the prophylactic measure of being able to stop voting laws from going into effect that were discriminatory by preclearance. And so what we saw is a whole host of states across this nation, including my own, put up barriers to voting, and those barriers haven't stopped. In fact, over 400 bills were introduced just this past year in 2021, just to make it harder to vote. And while these barriers are modern day barriers, we don't have to count how many jelly beans are in a jar, or pay a poll tax or literacy tax. But the reality is they're no less pernicious. They're limiting access to the ballot box for people of color. And I think that when African Americans and women, and when we're allowed to vote, we vote for folks who look like us, who will carry our voices to these houses of power and do things that are in our best interests. And so that's why you should care about voting rights, is because voting is a foundation of our democracy. It affects us in every level of government, whether that's a school board where elected officials determine what our children learn and what books they get and how they learn, to the halls of Congress. And so, for me, taking this up, voting rights and restoring the full protection of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 came naturally. Not only it's in my hometown, but I also am a life member of Brown Chapel AME Church, the historic church that the marchers gathered before the march and came back to after the march. So I grew up in the historic Brown Chapel year after year, watching John Lewis and so many foot soldiers come back and to remind the world of the importance of commemorating Bloody Sunday and making sure that it never happens again. Never did I think that I would become a member of Congress, but definitely never did I think that the cause for which John Lewis and those foot soldiers marched 57 years ago would become my cause too in Congress. But the reality is we're living currently without federal oversight over the most egregious state actors, and we have to do something to put federal oversight back in. My bill, H.R. 4, I've introduced in Congress since 2013, so in 4 successive Congresses. And what's different about it this time is that we introduced it without John Lewis. John passed, and it's now named in his honor, the John Robert Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. I'm proud to say that it passed the House of Representatives for the second time this year. But unfortunately, we were unable to get it across the finish line in the Senate and onto our president's desk. I know that the Biden-Harris administration feels very strongly that this is still a top priority, and we can't give up. Think about what would have happened if John Lewis and those foot soldiers gave up after they were bludgeoned on that bridge on Bloody Sunday. But instead, they dusted themselves off, and they came back out 2 days later and turned around Tuesday, and then ultimately for the Selma to Montgomery march that finally occurred in April of 1965. It brought us the 65 Voting Rights Act, and I look forward to talking about that with you all today, and really happy to be joined by Maya and Melanie and so many others. So thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. We've now also been joined by two other panelists, and then we're going to get into a great conversation. And Congressman, thank you so much for that, for really kind of level setting for all of us where we are and where we need to go. We have been joined by Melanie Campbell, who is the president and CEO of the National Coalition on Black Civic Participation and the convener of the Black Women's Roundtable. Melanie is recognized as one of the hardest working servant leaders in today's civil rights, women's rights, and social justice movement. If you follow Melanie on social media, you get to see her get arrested for voting rights on the steps of the Capitol in recent weeks. She has served as an advisor to US presidents, congressional members, corporate, labor, and nonprofit executives, philanthropists, faith leaders, and others on critical issues impacting Black America. Her recent work includes building support for the first ever Black woman nominee to the United States Supreme Court, combating redistricting efforts that minimize the Black vote, and fighting for filibuster reform. And we have also been joined by Maria Teresa Kumar, is Voto Latino's founding president. Maria Teresa is an American activist and social entrepreneur and an Emmy-nominated MSNBC contributor and seeking to shake up the political process. And she has done just that by leveraging youth, technology, social platforms, and influencers to reach the 6.5 million reach 6.5 million people monthly via Voto Latino. Voto Latino is a key civic engagement organization registering over 500,000 voters. In 2018, Voto Latino registered 15% of the new voters in the state of Texas. So getting right into this conversation, what have been some of the most recent successes? We've heard a lot about a lot of the challenges and the rollbacks, but trying to be in, start off on a good foot and a positive, where we've been able to, to quote John Lewis, make good trouble. Where have there been some successes at the state, local, or federal level in protecting and expanding the right to vote? And Maya, if you want to start with that, Maya, Melanie, anyone.
I think Maria Teresa is trying to get in. There she is. First of all, thank you. It's so great to see you, Maya.
Good
and
to see
Kimberly,
you.
and of course, our Congresswoman. She's Alabama, but she's all of our Congresswoman. And of course, Carol Jenkins, thank you, ERA Coalition, for the invitation. So I would say, I look at victory right now is that we're staying in the fight, right? I think we have not won the whole war when it comes to getting things done to fight back against voter suppression. The legal groups, of course, are doing their jobs, filing lawsuits, and they're hampered, right? But I think the victory for me has just been getting folks tuned in and getting involved. In the midst of the frustration, you have to find the ability to keep fighting, because this is not normal. So we've had to adjust to making it harder for people to vote. We've had to, and pre-Shelby versus Holder, we had all the tools, but since 2013, we found a way, Kimberly, to keep organizing around it. When they threw all the voter ID laws in the books, we found a way. We said, well, okay, we can't change it. Okay, we got to go take care of people and take them and go get their IDs. We did all these kinds of things, and we still had the ability to put good laws. Republicans who put the laws on the books, right, until 2020 didn't go their way, and now they're pushing back. So for me, it's really been building the kind of coalitions and networks and making this more people understand this is not just a battle for Black America, although that's obviously for me very, very important. This is about this democracy. This is a component of a bigger attack on the structure. And in my opinion, it's tied to the issue of still there's the racial component and the demographic shift in the country, where you have people now who not just supported whatever that was supposed to be in a president with former President Trump, but also that they will change the structure to keep a certain element of white America in power. So it's a tough battle. And so we would thank Congresswoman Sewell for continuing to fight, and all of the Congressional Black Caucus members, pushing. But we have to keep fighting now, even though we lost that vote. We've been talking about it. We have to find a way to keep shining a light on this issue as we are in the midterm. Right?
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely.
I'm gonna stop there. So, to me, it's just building the coalition and staying in the fight, because we're gonna win. We're gonna win.
Absolutely. Maya, could you talk a little bit about what are the practical impacts of voter disenfranchisement from a policy standpoint? Because it's one thing to say, okay, to the act of casting your vote, but what is the impact of not having, particularly Black and Brown communities, marginalized populations, not part of the decision-making process in our country?
So let me just take a step back and say hello, shout out to Congresswoman Terry Sewell. Thank you for your leadership, Congresswoman. You've been a stalwart on Capitol Hill, leader of the CBC, and certainly thank you for your continuous championing of the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. And Melanie Campbell, I can't say enough about this woman, because she is the hardest working woman in Washington, D.C. with regards to advocating everything civil rights. And certainly Maria Teresa Kumar, who has been not only a stalwart, but has basically amplified her voice through the media to really carry out the hard work of getting more people registered across the country. So I am just delighted to be here today on this wonderful panel. Let's just set the context. When the United States of America was created, literally, it was supposed to be a form of self-governance. It was supposed to be and representative of the democratic Enlightenment ideals of Western society. And so, the idea of, self-rule being a part of democracy was encapsulated in the Constitution. Yet their notion, the founding fathers' notion of who could self-rule, was only white men who were of means. And so that left out women, it left out people of color, it left out certainly African Americans, who were defined as even less than human in that original document. And so fast forward, women organized, people of color, African Americans are organized to basically count themselves into this democracy as human beings worthy of having a voice in our democracy. Women were able to organize to actually get the right to vote in the 19th Amendment. And we know that that meant white women. But by the 1965 Voting Rights Act, African Americans, which also include women, and this is voting is the ultimate intersectionality issue, finally received our real right to vote. And so in practical terms, what voting means is actually having a right to actually have your voice heard, to have your preferences determine the shape of our policies and our laws, and to actually have a society with laws and rules that are reflective of the beliefs of the majority of the nation. And so when we're talking about the practicality of voting, it literally means actually having a society that reflects your values. And when you do not have women and people of color able to actually have their voices heard at the ballot box, that means that their preferences are left out of the political and policy process. And then the end result is a skewed result, one that reflects the will and the values of primarily men in our society. And white men at that. And that is why we continually get this battle because, they don't want to give up power. And that is why we have to continually fight, because we deserve the right to actually have our voices heard.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We know, you guys have done a wonderful job laying the groundwork of the challenges that are at hand. Maria Teresa, I'd love for you to talk about some of the things that you're doing. And Voto Latino has just been so at the forefront in terms of growing registration, growing engagement. What are some of the things that you're looking at and expanding your work in 2022? Oh, you're muted. There you
So
go.
I am at for the very first time, and I'm reminded why I should not be at WeWork and working from home. But don't tell my team. Kimberly, can you hear me?
Yes, we got you.
So first of all, I want to thank Carol Jenkins. She has had the foresight of pushing this agenda for such a long time, and she has been a personal mentor of mine for a very long time. And the fact that she has always seen above where we should be and demand that the Constitution meets its basic necessities of equity for women is a real champion and so I feel very humbled to be a part of this conversation with her. Congresswoman Sewell, fighting for voting rights is of utmost importance for every single American. So thank you for your leadership. Melanie is my girl. I love her to death. I've known her for a very long time. And I'm grateful to be in the fight with her because she speaks the truth. And the truth is, as Maya was alluding to, was that we are right now in the fight for our democracy. What America is and what our promise should be. And Voto Latino, we started 18 years ago, focusing very much on young Latinos because they are the fastest growing group of Americans among the Latino population. 60% of Latinos are under the age of 33 years old. Let that sink in a little bit and recognize that we have a Latino youth turning 18 every single 30 seconds. And it means that there's opportunity, but it is also the backdrop of the rising Latino with the African-American community that has created the modern Jim Crow laws, trying to prevent our full enfranchisement. And while we are living right now, I believe, a very difficult moment trying to identify, where our country true north is. I'd like to remind everyone that we knew what our true north was the moment the twice impeached president rose to power. We mobilized, organized, out-registered, out-voted, not just in the 2018 election, but we won by doing the exact same thing. And we won the House, the Senate, and the White House. And so while we wring our hands trying to figure out what to do, we need to do that. Somehow, the right has gotten into our heads. I used to play basketball a long time ago, Kimberly, a long time ago. And my coach would always say, don't let them get in your head, because that is half the battle. And we've allowed the right to get in our head, even though we have the receipts to prove that we won and that the government is working for the folks that showed up. And at Voto Latino, to give you an idea, we registered 617,000 people last year in 2020. In Arizona, we registered 35,000. In Georgia, we registered 23,000 who turned out to vote. Of that 23,000 who turned out to vote, 10,000 of them were first voters. Biden won that state by 11,000. And I say this because we did it in coalition, and every single vote mattered. And it was multiple America who has been very clear at the voting booth who should be in charge of the government. And we need to make sure that while we may be feeling tired, because the last 2.5 years, for me, it's the last 6 years since Trump took office, it has not been easy. We know what it is to win. And when we have to fight, not just to get people to the polls, but in the court, as Voto Latino right now is doing, we have 4 lawsuits, believe it or not, in Texas alone, because they see the tea leaves just like we do.
Oh no, we lost her.
Actually, let me pick up where she left off. They see
Yes,
the
please.
that we are turning into a majority minority nation, and they are scared basically out of their minds. And so, we've shown the power of this coalition with the Obama era. We've shown the power of this coalition in basically getting Trump out of office. And the fact of the matter is that if we can expand the vote, and I'm going to turn it back over to Maria Teresa to finish her thought. Literally, we can bum rush the system in a way that leads us towards a truly multicultural and multiracial democracy. Go ahead, Maria Teresa.
No, and that's exactly right. And it is these conversations, I think, that we need to remind ourselves that we did the hard work. And the power, oftentimes, I don't like to hear when people say, the system is rigged. I said, no, the system works just as it's supposed to.
Mhm.
If we occupy the voting booth, we occupy the institutions, and that occupation actually turns material for us. And that's what we need to do. The fact that we have someone right now through Mark Elias fighting at the courts redistricting, the redistricting maps are actually not as bad as we thought we're going to be. So that means that we have between now and November to put our heads down, work in coalition, and register our hearts out, because it is going to be, I would say, this is going to be a defining election, not just for this midterm, but for the 2024 election. And I'm, again, I feel so fortunate in coalition with all of you, because the fight is real, but we have incredible people that are on those front lines every single day.
And
Absolutely.
if you don't mind me stepping in, I'm so sorry.
Sure.
But I think that it needs to be pointed out that the agenda of those who are trying to actually repress the vote is one where they want to take us back 100 years. Where they want to roll back, certainly the rights of people of color and women and everything that means. And so with that, I just wanted to make sure that we're clear about that agenda. And so the fight is absolutely real.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great segue into my next discussion point for all of you. You've talked a lot about the coalition, and we have seen in the past that, they've tried to put civil rights, women's rights, social justice, kind of tried to put them in these silos. And we know that these are all things that are interconnected in really, really vital ways. And I wanted each of you to give some thought about how do you see the Equal Rights Amendment and voting rights intersecting in this moment? Congresswoman, I'll start with you. Oh, you're still muted.
Sorry about that.
There you go.
After all these years, we should be used to getting off mute. Well, first, I wanted to just go back and also really commend Carol Jenkins for all of her work on the ERA coalition. I know that she has literally kept this issue on the front and has been a wonderful representative of the intersectionality that we're talking about. And so I thank you, Carol. And I know that for you too, being an advocate and being a strong advocate runs deep in your family, since you're related to me some kind of way. So nevertheless, the question was really about the intersectionality and really what we can do to keep this issue of voting rights first and foremost. And so let's start with the fact that your vote does matter. And as Maria Teresa said, the proof of that is that we got in 2020, the Biden-Harris administration got elected, and the House and the Senate. And the reality is that our vote, when we go out and vote in coalitions and together, we do make a difference. And we can't forget that. It's easy to get tired and weary, but we must not be deterred. We have not given up on this fight because it's just too important. It relates to everything that we're doing. And when I think about voting rights and women's rights and the rights of African Americans, all of them really center on having our voices heard and represented in this democracy. And so that is why we should all care about it. I also think that it's important to know that, change rarely comes in the halls of Congress. Rather, it's the hard work of activists that are on this panel and coalition building that demands of lawmakers that we do the right thing and that we pass these laws. And so I am just honored to be on this panel. And as a lawmaker, I know that my very existence wouldn't have been possible had it not been for the activism of our foremothers and forefathers. I think all of us can say that. And I think that it's important that we carry on this baton and we don't get weary. I mean, we can get tired, we can get mad, but we cannot give up because too much is at stake. Our very democracy is at stake.
Absolutely. And as one who definitely leads by example and not getting weary, Melanie, how do you see the intersection between voting rights and the ERA?
I wish I could say not get weary, but we try to be weary with a smile. How about that? Well, first of all, I'm going to give another shout out as you all did to Carol Jenkins and the whole ERA coalition, right? Who got us to this point for another time in history, and so close to getting the Equal Rights Amendment passed. We're just that close. And I think the one of the things that we did with the Black Women and Allies calls to action, trying to connect voting rights, which is the most fundamental and core to all the rights, to gain them and sustain them, right? And that's why we're in such a mess right now. But the idea of having equal rights for women in the Constitution, right? When we started pulling the coalition together, ERA coalition showed up, right? The women's rights, reproductive rights, women showed up, right? Folks who were fighting for economic justice showed up. Civil rights folks showed up. The idea of these issues that pull from we would say voting rights equals economic justice, voting rights equals women's rights, because at the end of the day, and we stood in front of the Constitution, the Supreme Court, and then you look across that street and you see the Congress, and we know just down the street, the White House, we know at the end of the day that having the ability to have your rights protected through the Constitution is really what has sustained us, and where you had to address that, and that the fact that as women in this country we don't really have equal rights which is tied to the fact that we still yet have had a woman president, in my opinion. But we're getting close. We're getting doggone close, right, with our Vice President Harris. So I think for me, at the end of the day, is just those understanding that voting rights is core to our constitutional rights being sustained or protected in many cases. And so with the ERA, it is one of those components of unfinished business, in just like race is unfinished business and addressing systemic racism, so are the rights of women. And the fact that we don't have equal rights in the Constitution makes this democracy not as strong and vibrant as it should and must be.
Absolutely. Maya, what are your thoughts on how advocates for the ERA, as we work to break down these silos and really make sure that our work is supportive across the board, how can ERA advocates make a better case for the expansion of voter protection and voter rights in their work to codify the Equal Rights Amendment?
I mean, I think just making the direct connection, and by the way, Carol Jenkins, shout out, you're great, you're fantastic, and we appreciate you and love you. Making the direct connection that, equal rights for women is, absolutely predicated on the ability to actually have a free and fair vote in this country, and that you cannot separate the two. We had to, as women, we had to fight to get our right to vote. And that is still true today. We have to fight to maintain our right to vote. And we have to do it in coalition. We do not have the luxury of actually engaging in siloed activity. You absolutely have to link our arms together and walk hand in hand. I call it an inclusion revolution. In order to get to a future where we all have an opportunity to live our best lives, where we have an equal opportunity to have our voices heard in our democracy and be respected, we absolutely have to recognize that sexism is interconnected with racism, is interconnected with heterosexism and discrimination against people by all kinds of different identities. And that means that people who have been historically and systemically oppressed in this country do not have the luxury of not recognizing that the isms operate in similar ways. That means that we have to join together in order to fight the oppression, whether it's patriarchy or systemic racism or whatever, to actually have, a victory over oppression. So with that, advocates cannot, operate alone. They have to walk hand in hand with others who are walking the same walk and basically explode the silos.
Absolutely. And along those lines, Maria Teresa, so much of the work, particularly over the last, probably 10 years that the ERA coalition has been trying to get the ERA back on the front burner. Part of that work has been breaking down this thought that the ERA was a white middle-class woman's issue. And we have seen that women of color are the ones who have been championing it, the ones who have been pushing it through these state houses. How is it resonating in the Latino community across the board? How are they connecting to it? And how can we as an advocacy organization better connect to all of our brothers and sisters across the country? Because it's not just about women, it's not about white women, it is about all of us making sure that we all have, we cannot be discriminated against because of sex.
So first of all, I think that when we talk about why do we need the ERA and why do we need voting rights, they're both the same side of the same coin in the sense that it's about power and who owns power and who has power. And the ERA is trying to advance shared power, recognizing that women are sadly discriminated against all the time. I'll share with you the example of a student loan. I always, half joke when it comes to student loans, because I say, the promissory note that one signs doesn't know gender. But the moment that young woman starts the same job that her white counterpart male does, as a Latina, she's earning 53 cents on that dollar that he's earning. That is only not just unjust, but there's a lack of equity through the lens that the institutions right now march. That would not be acceptable if we were able to say out loud that women have equal power and share equal agency in this country. And so there's not one person who should be alarmed by it. It's more a recognition of the deficiencies that women, in particular women of color, have had to face every single day since the incarnation of this country. And for Latinas, it's recognizing that Latinas are disproportionately young and teaching them about what the ERA is, not recognizing that it's even on the table. One of the challenges and one of the reasons we do this work at Voto Latino is, Kimberly, is that only 8 out of 50 states teach civic education in our schools. Mm-hmm. And if we know that close to over 55% of our classrooms are kids of color, where are they learning their rights, their agency, and where they should be making demands? And for the Latino community, because most of the people that we're talking to are American born, but first generation, they don't have their parents to navigate this country for. They're in charge of navigating the country for their parents. And so the ERA is very much a teaching tool that we want to continue using so that young women in particular, because we know that young women play a unique role in the families of Latino community, to navigate and to make demands and to ask the questions of why am I paying for the same student loan as my counterpart male, but not earning the same money and expecting to produce, and can really appreciate this, if not more and better, to demonstrate that I belong here. And so that is one of the things that we hope to advance.
Absolutely. It's so vital. So I have one more question for the panel, but while I ask it, I want the audience to start thinking about their questions, and please put them in the chat and we will try and get through as many of them as possible in the closing moments of this important town hall conversation. I want each of you to give some thought about the biggest opportunity and the biggest challenge right now in expanding and protecting voting rights. Congresswoman?
Well, great question. The biggest threat is voter apathy, and the fact that because people expect, the fruits of their labor, i.e., when you go vote, they want immediate change. And frankly, I think all of us are quite frustrated this year, but I try to focus my constituents on the good stuff, like the American Rescue Plan and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Plan. But clearly, it was a big blow to all of us about voting rights. That doesn't mean that we then just simply give up and don't go back to the polls. we need to make sure that folks know that your vote matters. And we have to vote like we've never voted before. You know, it was John Lewis who said that ours is not a fight of one day or 1 month. It's a struggle of a lifetime. And we have to make sure that we're engaged at the fight. Now, what is my hope? My hope is all of the young people, all of the coalitions that really rallied behind, and got rid of the last president, put in a better president. And frankly, I think that the fact that Georgia has 2 Democratic senators means that we continued to coalesce and go out and vote afterwards. So I'm a glass half full kind of girl. And, what really motivates me each and every day is just the knowledge of knowing that our forefathers and our foremothers had it so much worse. And, I'm not being asked to be bludgeoned on a bridge. I'm being asked to try to build together coalitions of activists and to try to help change the minds of policymakers so that we can put back, federal oversight into the Voting Rights Act. That's a small price to pay for the seat that I now hold. And I think that, to me, we must continue this fight and know that this fight is worth it.
Absolutely. Maya, your thoughts on the biggest challenges and opportunities?
Yeah, I think the opportunity actually also lies in the mobilization and the education of new, basically, voters, and the education and mobilization of young people, especially, as Maria Teresa keeps speaking about. This is a generational fight. And the fact of the matter is that we have a lot of power in those who are not mobilized. So we've got to get them engaged and into the struggle. I think that is a huge opportunity. A huge challenge are all of these voter suppression laws that are being enacted in states across the country that are not only repressive, but they're pernicious. I mean, in Georgia, they're actually seeking to use the local right to actually conduct their elections in terms of if the state doesn't like it in the future, they've figured out a way to appoint their person so that they can invalidate results out of Fulton County, which is primarily African American. So we've got to look at all of these pernicious ways that they're implementing strategies to invalidate voters of color and women voters, and to also invalidate our democracy at the same time. And the challenge there is that we're going to have to not just bum rush the system in terms of voting. We're going to actually have to bum rush the system in terms of how these state legislatures work. I do think that we need an investment in a multi-generational strategy that focuses on raising a cadre of new leaders, deliberately focused on new leadership from the local level that will then flow to the national level. But we need to get smart about how these state legislatures are operating, the power that they have over every 10 years over our redistricting processes matters. All of these things matter, and we need to get sophisticated and smart about how we wield power at these lower levels of government.
Absolutely. Melanie, challenges and opportunities.
The challenges, of course, which I just ditto all that has been said, and the biggest challenge are the laws, because it came so fast and so swift and quick right after the 2020 election. So we have that reality without enough legal ways. We can't, I'm not a lawyer, but what the lawyers say, we're not going to be able to sue our way out of this in time, and so we're here. But the opportunity is also just to remember who we are and whose we are, and that we've overcome a whole lot more than this, and that we will be able to find a way if we're organized, if we're unified, and that we don't get distracted. And that's because folks didn't think we could do what we did in 2020. But we did. We found a way. Folks didn't think we could do it after President Obama was elected in 2008, and then came back in 2012. But we did. And in between that, of course, the conventional wisdom has always said that the pendulum swings backward to the party out of power. But this is a different time. And I'm still hopeful. I'm with you, Congresswoman. Glass half full, try to make it 3/4 full sometimes, or whatever. But people are paying attention and more and more. And I believe we're going to have to overperform, right? And I'm not going to say all the organizing that we do, we will have victories everywhere. But I'm holding out on hope that justice will prevail, because what's happening in this country is so egregious, and the world is watching. Just what this, this whole idea of this democracy, will it be able to maintain itself? And so it's going to take young people. It is going to take us working together, and we're working more and more across not just generations, but also across race and culture and class and all of that. And we can win, and we will. I'm just praying it'll also be, and holding on to the faith that it'll also be in 2022, just like it was in 2020, and go against conventional wisdom.
That is my prayer too. Maria Teresa?
I like to believe that we're praying with action. So I think that it's very important for us to be pissed with purpose, and it's not enough to be angry, but actually do something with it and do it out of a place of love. I have to share with you what's happening right now and unfolding in Ukraine should be a big resounding alarm of what we're dealing with. We are living a unique moment in time where autocracy is sadly on the ballot box here in this country. And for as much as we'd like to say that every election is different or that our vote doesn't matter, I can't imagine another 4 years of what just left the White House. The other side has clearly told us what is at stake for our children and for our loved ones. When we're talking about taking away a woman's right to choose, when we're talking about eliminating affirmative action, when we're talking about denying climate change, and when we're talking about that we can't have an honest conversation around race in the classroom. They're not talking about the issues that we're grappling with as Americans, as a multicultural country. And I can't imagine not participating, because I have children who are 9 and 8. And we right now, people on this call and in America, we are the ancestors of them. How are we ancestoring to our children if not fighting for this country? Because there's no plan B. There's no place where a woman of color can pack their bags and go find asylum somewhere except in this country. And so I recognize that people may be tired, but they're trying to make us tired because the stakes are so huge. And what we need to make sure is that we keep our heads down and that we do all the efforts that we did last time. And it was the same. We identified what our best talents were. We rolled up our sleeves. We registered, we voted, and we did this in the face of an election that we didn't agree with. We did not attempt to overthrow the government. We lived within the parameters of democracy. And that is our charge right now, because I cannot imagine having my daughter, giving her the lack of opportunity that they have shared with us is very clear. That is on us, and it is our charge to be very clear that the stakes are not just for us, but it's literally for the children that are here right now. And yesterday when we were watching the events in Ukraine unfold, just seeing parents, packing up their kids and going into a metro stop and a makeshift bomb shelter, I can't imagine that. But that is what we're up against. But if anything is, our past is our past is our prologue, we've been through this before. And what we've done is rolled up our sleeves and gotten to work. And like I always say, there's no plan B, and this country is damn well good for fighting for, and we're not going anywhere. And I think that's what frightens them. And that's why we need to double down.
Oh, yes, all of that. You definitely, I wrote down the ancestors of our children. That is a profound concept. One of the things that we actually have not discussed in the relation to voting rights, and so much of, I think it's connected to so many things, is filibuster reform. So how do it is, we could go on for another hour talking about filibuster reform. And in the remaining minutes that we have, I think we have seen kind of where filibuster reform is, based on what certain senators have said in the Senate in recent times. But is this one of those pillaring issues that we need to really think about and organize around as it is related to voting rights, as it is related to reproductive rights, to the Equal Rights Amendment, and to so many issues that have kind of gotten caught up in not progressing because of the filibuster. What are your all thoughts? I'll put it out on the floor, and whoever wants to chime in.
I mean, there's been a history of carve-outs for filibuster rules in the past, and the fact that they don't want to do it for this just reflects where we are in society, and how we have allowed, the political dynamics of the Senate to basically trump basic human rights and voting rights in this country, and ultimately our democracy. I think it makes all the sense in the world not to let a simple rule of the Senate that's nowhere codified in the Constitution, that nowhere has to be, have it dictate how our democracy operates. And so I do think that filibuster reform is in order and should have been done like yesterday.
What's interesting is that filibuster reform can only take place if the senators vote to invoke a new rule or to carve out, as Maya said, an exception. And so, for me, yes, the Senate is a big obstacle. But the only way that I think we can overcome that obstacle is to get the folks who are against it out and put folks in who will see that when we have power, the Senate, the House, and the White House, we must use it because the other side will use it. I mean, we can appoint a Supreme Court justice with a 51 simple majority, but yet you can't debate voting rights on the Senate floor without actually having the filibuster rule be put aside, or have 10 other folks from the other side join us in order for that to happen. It's simply unacceptable. And I think that I'm going to keep my eyes on the prize, and that prize is to motivate, register, take to the polls more and more voters so that we vote folks in the Senate that would see that this is a priority and a huge obstacle to progress.
Absolutely. I think it's definitely changing the dynamic of the Senate.
And there's a whole lot of them up for re-election.
Thank you.
In 2022. They're just facts. I'm not being partisan, am I right? I'm just saying.
Absolutely.
Maria can say it. Maria, you have a C4? I can't say it. I have a C2.
So I am very much of the mind that if you're not working for us, you're working against us. And the whole premise of our democracy is of equal participation. And it was clear that in the last election, we participated to the best of our abilities, and they didn't like the results. And for the very first time, Voto Latino, after working and engaging with one of the senators, where it was very clear that she was not going to change her mind, we launched a campaign called Adios Cinema. Because if you cannot be on the side of your voters, specifically in Arizona, where the Latino vote brought her into office along with the Native American community, then you have no business being there because you're not representing the best interests of the country. I do think that we need more from the White House on this issue, and we need more from the Senate to explain to the American people. People are busy. But one thing that they don't realize is that because of the slew of anti-voting legislation coming up out of GOP-controlled state houses, the vote that you were able to cast in 2020 may not be able to be cast in the same manner in 2022. And it's all by design. And there's not one American, Democrat, Republican, Independent, who should not feel personal umbrage of this idea that people are trying to change the rules of our democracy in the middle of the game. And every single American should feel angry and encourage them to contact their members of Congress and their senators, because unless we make the noise that we want for representation, because we believe in the system that we have all decided to claim as the more perfect way of enfranchisement, that is for democracy with all of her imperfections, then they will continue feeling, they won't feel the heat, and they will continue acting as they will. I will tell you that when we announced the Adios Cinema campaign, we were pledging to basically spend six figures. We're surpassing our goal of what we expected, because people understand and they get it. But we need that kind of energy at the voting booth and at the members' offices, because unless we make the noise, that's the only time I found, and Melanie, you can correct me, where many of these members actually, present company excluded, where some of these senators actually find their spine, is when they see people actually marching and talking about it.
Indeed. And I think that is a perfect place to leave this conversation. Deep thanks to Congresswoman Sewell, Melanie Campbell, Dr. Rockeymoore, Cummings, and Maria Teresa Kumar for joining us for this really important conversation. And I think, as we were getting into this conversation about the filibuster, we really could have gone for another hour. But we want to thank all of you for joining us today. For our audience and our attendees, please subscribe to our newsletter to get recaps and recordings of this town hall and all of our others, and join our mailing list. And also save the date for March 22nd, as we will be kicking off the Time Is Now campaign with a virtual event marking the 50th anniversary of Congress's passage of the Equal Rights Amendment. Thank you all so much. Enjoy the rest of your day.